Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This week marks a shift. Up until this point, we've been talking primarily about quantitative research. Now we're going to switch gears and start talking about qualitative research. Also, in this second part of the course, we're going to cover some types of research that don't fit easily into either the quantitative or qualitative box, like action research. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Um, First, we're talking about qualitative research design. And the text we're using is Understanding Research: A Consumer's Guide by Plano and Creswell. Okay, and in that book, this is chapter 9, I believe. Okay, so slide 2. So why qualitative research? Why would we use qualitative methods? Now, for quantitative, what we wanted to find out were we wanted to be able to answer questions like what or where or when or how much or how often. Okay, and we needed large random samples, random ideally, but not always possible, in order to answer those kinds of questions. Now, for qualitative research, we want to investigate why and how, particularly the reasons behind various aspects of human behavior. So we need smaller, focused samples. And also, we organize and report results primarily by categorizing data into patterns. And now with quantitative research, you're looking for patterns as well, but usually we let the computer, do the calculations. Okay, and slide 3. Characteristics of qualitative research methods. In terms of our data sources, the main types of data sources we use are participant observation. That means we're observing, but we're also participating. It means exactly the way it sounds. And interviews. Sampling methods are non-random, okay? These are recruited participants. It's not easy to replicate the studies because we're studying specific people, the behavior, the thoughts, the ideas, the perspectives of specific people. The findings are not generalizable in the same way that quantitative research is. However, often readers find that they can identify with the participants, and the closer they can identify with the participants, the more they feel the findings apply to them, can generalize to them. Okay, now the researcher is the instrument used to collect the data in qualitative research, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. The data is non-numeric. Now, it can be reduced to numbers often, but the raw data is non-numerical. Field notes, audio, video recordings, photographs, documents, reports, those kinds of things, words. The raw data is words. Okay, so here's a brief history. In order to really understand quantitative versus qualitative, you need to have kind of an understanding of the history of science. So why don't we go back to the medieval period? And I'm talking about the history of science from the European or Western perspective, okay? Because the history of science is very different in other cultures. Okay, so let's go back to medieval Europe, right? So how did people know things then? It was based on their theology and also on mysticism. That's what was dominant. I know universal truths because the monks told me, right? And then we have this so-called scientific revolution during the Age of Reason, right? So then we have Bacon, who's associated with this idea of the scientific method. I know because I followed a set of procedures that led me to universal truth, right? Okay. Then this idea of rationalism and deduction we get from Descartes, right? I know a universal truth because I can prove it through logic. So then, okay, so we can figure these things out, and usually they were talking about things in the natural world, astronomy, chemistry, this kinds of things. These kinds of things were some of the first sciences to be explored, mathematics, that sort of thing. Um, but we associate Kant with this idea that we can apply what we believe about the natural world to human behavior. So I know universal truth about people and society because I use the scientific method to find out universal truths about people. Okay? And that kind of is the sociological positivism. Okay, so this idea of positivistic is that I can discover scientific universal truths using the scientific method. Okay, and sociological positivism is I can discover universal truths about people and societies using the scientific method, right? Then there's a shift. Because some people go, I don't know. People are different from the movements of the constellations. People are different from, the behavior of basic chemicals when you put them together. People are different from the natural world. And so you get this idea of interpretivism, all right, or anti-positivism. So you have the positivists and the anti-positivists, and this idea of interpretivism. I cannot learn about the social realm using the scientific method is this idea, right? I can understand because we're not talking about atoms bouncing around. We're not talking about basic chemicals reacting with one another. We're not talking about the movement of planetary and other stellar bodies, right? I can understand social action through interpretive means based on understanding the purpose and meaning that individuals attach to their own actions. So this is Weber, right? And so people have choice in a way that atoms and stars and other things in the natural world presumably don't. And so I need to find out the purpose and meaning that they attach to their actions in order to understand what's going on. Now, the kind of history of knowing has progressed even beyond interpretivism, which is the main philosophy behind qualitative research, whereas positivism is the main philosophy behind quantitative research, to this idea of critical theory, which is I can use social science to critique processes and institutions. And that's actually beyond the scope of this course, but hopefully you'll have a chance to take a research methods course where you do talk a little bit about critical theory and particularly its applications to social justice. Okay, so I got this from Wikipedia, a lot of it, the images especially, and from other sources. So there's a lot of information out there about what's called epistemology. Okay, knowing, how we know what we know. Okay, and now, so we have positivistic is this scientific method, usually it's quantitative, right? Um, um, but on the interpretivistic side, which is qualitative, there are certain research genres within it. Okay, now there are 5 major ones we're going to talk about. In your text, it only talks about 4. It leaves out phenomenology. But phenomenology is so prevalent in education that we're putting it into the course, even though they left it out of the text. Yeah, so 5 common interpretivistic or qualitative research genres. Ethnography, okay, comes from anthropology. Phenomenology, what I just mentioned as being very popular in education research. Narrative or life history, grounded theory, and case study. Now, case study, some people would argue that it's not an interpretivistic research genre, but we can talk about that a little bit later. And slide 6. So where do these qualitative research genres come from? Where do these interpretivistic research genres come from? What are they really? So first of all, ethnography. We think of Boaz, right? I can learn about a culture by living in that culture and learning its language and worldview, right? So anthropologists, we think of them going to some remote place, living there, learning the language, and learning the worldview. Okay, so immersed in the setting. Phenomenology we associate with Husserl. I can contribute to knowledge by describing the meaning, structure, and essence of the lived experience of a phenomena for a person or group of people. Okay, that's how I can describe the meaning, structure, essence of the lived experience of a phenomenon for a person or group of people. And that's how I can contribute to knowledge. Okay, narrative inquiry. In education, we associate this with Clandidin. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I can describe the lives of one or more individuals by collecting and telling their stories and discussing the meaning they give to their experiences. Okay, and here we're going to focus usually on one person. Grounded theory, Glaser and Strauss. I can use from the ground up interpretive inquiry to generate theory about a central phenomenon. So when we're talking about ethnography and phenomenology and narrative inquiry, they're focused on describing like what the researcher sees, experiences, hears while they are in a particular setting or working with a particular group of people, right? Talking with a particular group of people or individual person, right? But grounded theory is different in that instead of being focused on kind of description, it's focused on generation, creating theory, okay? Now, case study in education, we associate this with Stake, also with Yin. I can describe and interpret what is happening or has happened in or to a group of people bounded in space and time, right? So we get this from the medical field, right? This idea that I can study this one case, right? What happened for this person when they got this disease, right? In education, often case studies are a school or a school district. Okay. In counseling, case study is very similar to how it is in the medical field. Usually we're talking about one person who experienced something. And so we're describing the bounded in space, usually a location and in time. Something was happening and here's how it went down, kind of thing. All right. So slide 7. What characteristics distinguish the different qualitative research designs? First of all, the central phenomenon of interest. Okay, are we talking about a group culture, a group's culture? Are we talking about an individual story? Are we talking about an organizational unit? What are we talking about? What's the central phenomenon of interest? Or if we're talking, are we actually looking at a phenomenon, something that happens, and that's what we're interested in. Okay, I'll explain more about that when we talk about phenomenology. Intent. Is our intent to describe and interpret, or is it to develop a theory, right? So grounded theory is different in that it's the main intent is to develop a theory. Now, we develop theories with using other research genres, but mainly if I'm doing a phenomenological study, I want to describe and interpret. Okay, that's what I'm going in trying to do. Also the procedures, how data are collected, analyzed, and interpreted, and how results are reported. And this often depends on kind of like the historical background of that research genre. So ethnography has its roots in anthropology. Therefore, some of the things about how data are collected relate to that kind of anthropological type of research design, where you're being immersed in a setting for an extended period of time. Okay, so let's talk about ethnography first, or ethnographic research. Here we have a study of cultural patterns and perspectives of participants in their natural settings, right? And the main thing is they're in their natural settings. And this was a departure from the science of the time, right? In that we're not bringing people into the lab. We're going to them. We're going and observing them in their natural settings. We want to analyze, describe, and interpret a culture of a group. We're there over time. Sometimes the study may describe the people over time, but sometimes it's more of a snapshot. But we're there long enough to feel that we understand that culture. Okay, key characteristics: natural setting. We're doing field work. We're there. Okay. And the culture is the lens for interpreting the results. This is the people's own interpretation of why they do things. That's the lens we're going to use to interpret the results. And the results are investigations of actions and behaviors that are uncovered by watching and listening to what people do and why, what explanations they attach to it. Okay, so primary techniques: participant observation, and there are different ways you can do that. There's this one photograph that always cracks me up, where it's like a European in some African village, and he's sitting there in his linens and taking notes, while there is a member of whatever culture fanning him, and he's observing what's happening. And that was considered good science at one time. But just this idea, usually in educational context, you're a participant observer when you are a member of whatever that setting is. So if I were a volunteer in a classroom and I was observing what was happening in that classroom, I would be, and for research purposes, as well as doing my whatever volunteer duties were, then I would be doing participant observation, active participant observation. Okay, so field notes are how we collect the data on participant observation. Okay, so I'm going to write down what I see. That's the most common way of collecting the data. Video can also be used, but there's something about writing down what we see, what we hear, that has historically been the main source of raw data. And then triangulation happens when we have multiple perspectives, okay, multiple sources of finding, of deciding what something is or why it occurs, right? So we see one interaction between a teacher and student, and we, are writing our notes about what happened, or typing up after, trying, like the brain download. And then we see another interaction between a teacher and a different student, and we see another interaction. And based on all these data these points of data coming together, then we can offer an interpretation of what's going on. Okay. Now let's talk about okay, so that was ethnography. Now let's talk about phenomenology, or phenomenological research. The goal here is to understand the meaning, structure, and essence of the lived experience of a phenomenon for a person or a group of people. And in a way, it's similar to ethnography, except ethnography is focused on a culture. Okay, you're looking at a particular culture or society. Here, we're looking at this lived experience for a person or group of people. It may not be that we're in some cultural, we're focused on understanding the cultural group. It may be that we're focused on understanding, I don't know, how discipline happens, how discipline works in a particular school setting, let's say. And phenomenological research is very popular in social sciences, and sometimes it's what people are referring to when they talk about a qualitative study. And in fact, there's sometimes some confusion because it's a research genre, but it can also be thought of as kind of a philosophy. People associate phenomenology very closely with interpretivism. Okay, but we're thinking of it as a research genre here. Slide 11. So key characteristics: how human beings make sense of experience and transform that experience into consciousness, both individually and as shared meaning. Okay, so this is a little bit different than what we're going to learn about narrative research. There's this idea of we get these individual interpretations, or transformations into consciousness, but there's also this idea of shared meaning. Okay, it requires carefully and thoroughly capturing and describing how people experience some phenomena, how they perceive it, describe it, feel about it, judge it, remember it, make sense of it, and talk about it with others. And this focus on meaning making as the essence of human experience. Okay, so there's no separate or objective reality out there. That's a very positivistic type of perspective, is this objective reality, right? Remember those folks were looking for this universal truth, this objective reality. Here there's an idea, the phenomenological perspective is that individual people make meaning. Okay, there's not an objective reality. It's like everything is subjective. Okay, from my perspective, I'm going to make meaning in a certain way. Now, analytically, researchers are seeing the essence or essences to this shared experience. So even though I have I have a way of interpreting things, I see the world in a certain way, there isn't this universal truth. There may be essences to particular phenomena, particular experiences, and that's what we're looking for as researchers. Okay, and shared meanings. How are we all? What's all of our perspectives on the role of discipline in elementary education? For example, within the sample that the researcher is looking at. Okay, all right. This idea of getting to the essence is termed phenomenological reduction. Okay, slide 12. So the primary techniques: in-depth interviews, right? To understand the meaning I attribute to something, you have to ask me, right? Also participant observation. What do I, as the researcher, see happening in the setting? And often I can take, okay, I saw this. What does that mean? Take it back to the participants and say, yeah, I see what's happening in the now, in that moment. And I can gather information then because I was there and I saw it happen. It's generally not as immersive as ethnography. You're not going to be spending a year in a particular classroom, usually for phenomenological study. You may, it's a shorter time, it may be a shorter time period, or maybe several visits over the course of a school year, some kind of natural unit for whatever it is that you're studying. Now, again, watch out. The term phenomenology is very popular and is sometimes used to refer to the philosophical perspective of the researcher rather than the methodology of the study. But when we look at some studies, you'll see that usually it's pretty clear what's going on. Okay, narrative research. Key characteristics. So this is the third one. So we had ethnography, phenomenology, and now we've got narrative research. Key characteristics. There's a relationship developed between the researcher and the participant, similar to a close friendship. And it's characterized by an equality of voice, right? So I am, I'm going in to learn from you, about you. And I think of it as like the role of a biographer, right? So I'm going to come, there's an equality of voice. I'm going to focus on the experience, your experiences and the chronology of those experiences, right? So this is this whole biography idea, right? What happened to you first, next, and so on. Focus on life stories collected through data, collected through interviews, right? Life stories constructed through data collected through interviews, right? You never get the whole thing of a person's life, but you construct a story about their life based on the interviews that you have with them. You are retelling the story whenever we construct it, right, as the researcher. And we include context. It's important to understand the context. So it's important to understand the place and the time in a particular story. And there's usually some kind of collaboration between the researcher and the participant for the final document. So the researcher may give, hey, this is what I wrote. Does this seem, is there stuff missing? Is there stuff that I got wrong? Let's talk about this. And the narrative is built around the question, and then what happened next. And that's how we discover how things happen, by knowing the sequence of events. Okay, slide 14. Types of narrative research: autobiographies, biographies, personal accounts, also called personal narratives, personal documents. So often letters are used. In this day and age, it might be emails, personal documents, life stories, histories, and just the documents around, like, I think of birth certificates and obituaries and the documents of life, the kind of things that kind of mark special occasions in our lives. And classification on what kind it is depends on who authored the account. Was it the person whose story it was, or was it someone else? The scope, the kind of theoretical conceptual framework, and are all, what kind of elements are included in the narrative. Okay. And so about the narrative research process, there is a need to establish a nurturing or caring or mutual relationship with the participants. And because of the complexity and the depth you're going into, where you have one participant. Just like with ethnography, you're studying one culture. You're going in deep, right? The goal is to tell this participant's story. And questions for researchers: do you have the time, the resources, the access, the experience, the commitment in order to do a kind of narrative research process? It can be very rewarding to understand someone's story. It does take commitment on both parts, on the part of both parties, in order to conduct a narrative research project. Okay, techniques: restoring oral history, examinations of photos, memory box artifacts, storytelling, letter writing, email, and biographical or biographical writing, like someone looking in someone's diary, that kind of thing, or reading what someone else wrote about your participant. Slide 17. Now watch out. There's narrative inquiry, which is this kind of life history idea that we've been talking about, right? Where we're collecting descriptions of events through interviews and observation, and then synthesizing them into a story. The story is the outcome. But there's also analysis of narratives. So someone tells me a story, I record it, I get the recording transcribed. then I can study that narrative and maybe the narratives of other participants in my study, and I can look for themes that emerge. I'm analyzing someone's narrative. I'm analyzing a story that someone told me. But I'm not doing a narrative inquiry. I'm not getting their life history. I'm analyzing a specific story that they told me, and usually, the story of several other people as well. And that would be a phenomenological study, okay? Not a narrative inquiry. All right. Okay. Um, okay. Now let's talk about case studies. Kind of controversial, because the thing that distinguishes a case study is you're bounded in space and time, and so and then you have a particular focus, right? So the ethnographer is focused on a culture. The person who's doing a life history or narrative study is focused on an individual. The phenomenologist is focused on something that happens, the essence of shared lived experience. And then you have case studies, which, if you want to understand an organization, right? Let's say a school, you're trying to understand a school, there may be quantitative research that you're looking at, right? We customarily look, if I want to learn about a school quickly, first thing I look at is their school report card. I find out things like their average reading scores or math scores, if it's high school, their graduation rate, that kind of thing, right? So some people say it's not its own genre. You're pulling from a lot of different, you can pull for quantitative, you can interview people. I do interview the principal, the teachers, the students, the parents, you're interviewing people, you're pulling from different traditions to create this case, to an understanding of this individual or organization. Individual that something happened to, an organization that something happened at. Um, 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 as you're developing this case, right? This case study. And so that's where the controversy is, basically. But it is more associated with qualitative research, even though when you read a case study, there may be numbers and graphs and charts. It's more associated with interviewing people, going there and seeing what it's like there, and talking with people about what happened, that kind of thing. So the case is identifiable within a specific context. Key characteristics are that it's particularistic, descriptive, and heuristic. So you have this idea of you're at this specific school, or you're studying this specific group. You're studying juvenile delinquents. You're studying female softball players. You're studying, whoever you're studying, you're studying a particular group. We use it to examine complex issues, to answer descriptive questions and explanatory questions, and to study processes. And we can also use it to provide causal explanations, because we are seeing, what happened first and then what happened and then in this setting, okay, during this period of time. And we're asking people, well, why did that happen? Yes, and so we can provide causal explanations in that way. Now, you can provide the focus on why in qualitative research means that often you are providing causal explanations of what happened. Okay, the difference between people and atoms or chemicals or planets is that you can ask people why and they can provide an explanation, or based on drawing from all the sources, you can provide, as the researcher, an explanation of why something happens. This is the power of qualitative research, the why, okay? Which, since we've studied quantitative research now, we can only say, why. We can only We can only claim causality under very specific conditions with quantitative research. But it's kind of, causality is kind of the point in qualitative research. Why and how are the point. Okay, so case study research, this is slide 19. Again, you're focused on a unit. Oh, wait, no. Is that the same? Okay, slide 18 and 19 are like almost identical. Okay, sorry about that. My bad. Okay. Slide 20. Case study designs. Here's how you go about it. First of all, you have a purpose, you know. Let's see. I want to understand how decision making happens in a charter school. I want to understand how decision making happens in this particular charter school that has a lot of socioeconomic diversity, right? Let's say. And then I determine my research questions. I define what case I'm going to study. It's a particular place. I determine the role of theory development and case selection. So if I have a theory about decision making in charter schools, that's going to help guide where I decide to study. I have a theoretical or conceptual framework that I'm usually going into with, and I'm going to decide if it's a single, multiple, or collective case study. So am I only going to be looking at one charter school? Am I going to be looking at decision making at a charter school, a traditional public, and a private? Am I going to be looking at, you know, across 3 or 4 charter schools, that kind of thing? Okay, so we've talked about these 5 types of research design in qualitative research. So how do you tell what it is you're looking at? Maybe the author named the design and the title are abstract. Maybe the purpose statement suggests what the research design is. Maybe the beginning paragraphs of the methods section identify the design. I am taking a phenomenological approach. This is an ethnographic study of, you know, that kind of thing. This is a life history of, and so on. And examining the methods and the results sections to identify how the author collected, analyzed, and reported the data. Okay, so that gives you a sense of, you know, were they there? Were they immersed in a culture for a long time? Were they focused on interviewing a single person several times, or was it a different design from ethnography or life history? Those are the ethnographies and narrative research tend to be the easiest to pick out. Okay, so how do you evaluate the design? Now, a lot of this is going to remind you of how we were talking about evaluating quantitative research design. Okay, when I think of doing quantitative versus qualitative work, in quantitative, I spend so much time figuring out every single detail, right? And then the actual analysis is like I hit enter and I'm done. With qualitative, I go in with my questions, and sometimes what happens in the setting determines how things play out. But it's important to go in with kind of an understanding of what genre am I using. So is there an overall plan? Am I using terms correctly? Something about the research design should be evident in the paper. Now, is my choice of research design appropriate and justified? I'm not going to study, you know, decision making in charter schools and only talk to one person. Because one person, even if it is the, assistant principal or assistant director who's, or the principal or the director, one person is not going to give you every aspect of decision making in charter schools. Okay, so does the design fit what I'm looking to learn? Is there a convincing explanation for why my research design was selected? If I'm starting this mythical charter school, oh yeah, and that person, they happen to be my next door neighbor, and that's why I chose them. No, um, there has to be a convincing reason. Okay, so are good data collection procedures used? Are they appropriate? Are they rigorous? And are good qualitative data analysis procedures used? Again, are they appropriate? Are they rigorous? Do you get the sense that the person was really focused on carefully collecting their data and carefully analyzing it? Okay, slide 25. Now results. The reporting of results and interpretations. This is what I like. I get, I have a manuscript or whatever, or article that I've just printed out, right? I read the title, I read the abstract, and then I'm flipping, right, getting to the results, because this is, the big reveal. Are they appropriate? Are they complete? If rigorous procedures were used, then your hope is that the author is going to be able to give you appropriate and complete results. Um, um, and do all the elements fit together in a coherent way? Sometimes it's like there's this hodgepodge that was just kind of thrown together. I have all these data sources. I'm just going to put this all in. But there isn't a coherent way they fit together. And was the purpose addressed? Do I understand by the end of the paper how decision making happens in charter schools? Yeah, was the study intent actually fulfilled? And you hope that by the end of a research project, you have actually fulfilled your study intent, because otherwise it's a real bummer. Okay, so that's the last slide, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.